Hello, I'm Alan Lee. Welcome to our series of election programmes covering issues that we believe are central to the health and well-being of all New Zealanders. Now, in previous programmes, we've talked about how well we do in caring for our children, and we've discussed the state of our education system in preparing those children for their roles in society. This week, we're focusing on the welfare system. Does it really help people who fall through the cracks, or is it a stumbling block to them getting back on their feet? In 1960, just 1 person in 50 of the working age population was on a benefit. By April 2008, after a decade of strong employment growth and before the recession, the number on a benefit had increased to 1 in 10. Well, joining me in the studio to discuss the issue is former ACT MP and the founder of the New Zealand Centre for Political Research, Dr. Muriel Newman, and Auckland City Commissioner Diane Robertson. Well, ladies, thank you both very much indeed for coming in. Muriel, last year you wrote a paper called The Dark Underbelly of Welfare. So, is our welfare system working properly?
No, it's not. And the reason it isn't is that it actually traps too many people. And the thing is that welfare was always meant to provide income support for brief periods of time if you're able-bodied. And the thing is, we've got people who've been on it for like 10, 15, 20 years. And of course, living at very low income levels for that length of time, it's too hard. So no, there are real problems with welfare and that welfare trap.
Diane, you're obviously working with people who have found themselves often on a benefit of some sort. Do you think it's working?
I think it provides for people who are in need, and I think it was actually established to do that. And if we look back at women in the past who were perhaps widowed and only choice was to put their children into workhouses or into children's homes, that obviously they needed to be in receipt of a benefit, and often for long periods of time. So I'm not sure. I think the principle of it is absolutely right. We should as a nation care for people who are vulnerable. I think what we've done is perhaps extended that group out, and we haven't put in supports, or we haven't put in a program that says, actually, this is the way that you will come out of welfare. And so for people in the past, if their children were young and they were on a benefit, they actually were going back into work as their children got older. Now we have an established, I think, almost entitlement to being on it for life, and children are born into that as an entitlement as well.
So what have we done? What's changed that whereas, I mean, we had those statistics in the beginning that you know, it was 1 in 50 in 1960, it's 1 in 10 in 2008. What's changed that people are no longer moving through the system, they're going into the system and staying?
We're almost, in a way, we're burdened by our own success. We've just been a wonderful welfare country, and so it has been very easy to go on a benefit. We've encouraged. I mean, if we look at solo parents, in the past it was family needed to support first, family needed to help, and then it's changed. When it's a benefit, you can go out and be independent. So we've encouraged dependency in many ways.
I would guess, I know that you used to have a blog about living on the smell of an oily rag. I would guess that you would agree with that we've made it too easy.
Oh, we have, and I was shocked actually to see the figures, because you can only surmise really, but the Welfare Working Group put out a paper a little while ago, and they explained that only 1 in 3 people on a benefit actually are ever work tested. In other words, there's only a requirement for 1/3 of the people on welfare, that's over 100,000 out of the 350,000, to actually do anything that will help them to engage back in work. Now, of course, if you're sick, if you've got a disability, then it's quite different, because welfare should be there to support you, and in many cases it should actually be more generous because you're on there in the long term. But the problem is we've got this overburdened problem of all these other people who actually could work if the system gave them the support that they need to get back out there, and of course if the economy is doing well and there are jobs.
I'm glad you mentioned the Welfare Working Group, because that report came out less than an hour before the Christchurch earthquake happened, and of course it was completely lost in all the disaster news that followed it. But one of the things that the group was suggesting was that we should replace all the multiplicity of benefits that we currently have replace it with a single benefit, which is where they wanted to call the job seeker support. Is that the way to go to simplify the system?
Look, I actually totally agree with that, and probably for a little bit of a different reason. I remember a few years ago being told that there were schools in New Zealand where if the teacher said to the, say, 7 or 8-year-olds, what do you want to do when you grow up? The boys would say, go on the dole, and the girls would say, go on the DPB. And when you've got this sort of ingrained dependency culture in a country, I think you've got real problems. You need to have kids who are aspiring to be working and all those other things, and yet for 2 or 3 generations, many of them have grown up in families where nobody has worked for a living. So I'm all in favour of simplifying the system, making it really focused on helping those people who are able to get back into work. And of course, if they've got multiple problems, that's not an easy job. But the whole system has to be geared up towards doing it. And I think that the reform that they talked about is a step in that direction.
Do you think it would work, Diane?
No, I don't. So until now, I was sort of we were nicely along the path. Now we're going to divert about it. I think, and I see it on everyday life, when we start to do that, we treat all people as if they're the same. And so when you get somebody who has a serious illness that is not going to go away, chronic life-threatening illness, having to go and sign up at a doctor's every 6 weeks to say that they've got a chronic life-threatening illness, and that we need to keep thinking about work testing them or work readiness, I think that's just a ludicrous situation. It's a waste of money.
That's what I was talking about. I was talking about able-bodied people, and that's quite different.
But if you've got one benefit, and that's what it is, that's where you're actually pushing everybody through that door. People who, and then I go, people who are able-bodied, I think there's a lot of people around who are able-bodied, but they're not actually abled in terms of emotional capacity, they're not able in terms of life skill, they're not able in terms of their background and the culture of working, they're not able in terms of educational ones, and they're not able in terms of social interactions. And until they're given assistance in those, I don't think testing somebody for work is actually of much value.
Okay, let's take a quick break there, then we'll come back and we'll chat some more. Join us again in a couple of moments. Welcome back to our discussion on welfare in the run-up to this year's election. Our guests are former ACT MP Dr Muriel Newman and Auckland City Commissioner Diane Robertson. Before the break, Diane was talking about people not just being physically unable to get work, but actually there being a whole range of different issues that prevent them. You look like you possibly didn't agree entirely with that.
No, it's not that I don't agree. I just think that the system has to be far better at supporting people. In other words, if you have got multiple problems, then a genuine welfare system will give you the help you need to overcome those problems or feel that you can cope to be able to go out to work. And that will mean a range of different things. I remember many years ago visiting the welfare system in Wisconsin in America, and if you remember, they led their reforms back in the mid-90s that President Clinton was pushing through. And the thing that really impressed me was that they took anybody who was able-bodied, you know, and you've got to remember that these are not people with disabilities that prevent them from earning a living, but they took these people who had multiple problems and they gave them this wraparound service. It was just incredible. And at the end of a process, these people were out there independent, proud of the fact that they were earning a living, earning good money, and getting on with their life in a way that they simply couldn't do when they were dependent on the state. And that's the vision that I've always had for welfare. It's something that is very, very supportive. And it doesn't give up on people. It actually says, look, we can help you. And to be quite honest, some of those people will never be able to contribute very much. But at least they'll get up in the morning and they'll go out there and they know that they're making their own way, even if they have to be supported in many different ways.
Have we become too much of a nanny state? We want to take care of people so much that we don't give them a chance?
Look, the reality is New Zealand has provided a wonderful welfare system, and it has been there to support those people. I think we should only be proud of what New Zealand put in place. But things have changed. Economies have changed. We don't have the same sort of amount of money that we had before. You know, we have had an amazing state housing system, and that is just under such pressure and stress at the moment that actually things can't continue to be the same in the future. So we're at that point in time of saying, how do we do it differently? How do we change the culture and attitudes that we've set up over the last 20 years? How do we actually obtain, I mean, and I agree, you know, to think that people would get up in the morning and they'd go to a highly paid job and they'd take pleasure in working, that would be fine. But where are the jobs? Where is the possibility for people? There's a lot of things we have to look at before we've actually got the answer to this.
David Cameron says, in a responsible society, we don't ask, what am I just owed, but what more can I give? It's almost like what you're saying reflects that. We have to start thinking outside where we've always thought, in that, you know, there is a state and it provides whatever I need. It's almost like it's much more of a two-way thing. We have to give in order to receive.
I actually think it's a very complicated thing. I think we've had a lot of what we've looked at solution-based things of, you know, wraparound services. We've had all sorts of things, and people aren't engaging in them. They're falling over, and we're spending a lot of money and not making a lot of progress. So there is a time for me to say, what is it actually that would make a difference? We need to really be saying it's not just about, we see it with housing, it's not just about giving somebody a house. It's not just about increasing their benefit, because those things are done or incomes increased and people are still struggling. What we actually have to do is say, how do we work with those people who have been so entrenched in this benefit system for so long that have actually a culture that isn't, in many ways, isn't functional, and we're the perpetrators of that. So how does that get changed? I think we do a lot of blaming the beneficiary or blaming the person at the other end without thinking about what did we do to put them there in the first place.
I agree. It's a system that I think has got itself out of kilter with where probably most of us would like it to be. At the beginning, you know, it was a system that provided a helping hand to work in a better life. And now it has been bogged down, I think, by this entitlement mentality, and also by politicians who essentially think if they're more generous to people, then it will all work out all right. But the problem is that the system now is riddled with people who are using it instead of being able to use it, you know, properly to get themselves to be independent. They're using it as a lifestyle. And that's not really helpful in these times where things are really tight economically. I believe that the system itself needs to be reformed. It needs to be redone in a quite a strong way. This is why I quite like the whole idea of the combining the benefits in some ways, so that you in a way have a fresh start for welfare in New Zealand, and then you can really take care of the people who need help. But for everyone who is capable of working at some level, then you really focus on helping them to take that step so they're out of the benefit system and independent.
But then, as Diane says, it's actually finding work, real work for them to do.
But then you've got to think it's a chicken and egg situation, actually. The cost of welfare is huge. The government is spending enormous amounts of money, way more than they probably should for the size of the country. And I think they've now just realised it, as we're all aware. But the point is that if we can help more people who are able to work take those jobs. I just read a headline the other day about how a lot of immigrant workers are coming into New Zealand to do the jobs that Kiwis won't do anymore. And I'm thinking to myself, well, hang on a minute, we've got a minimum wage. It's not like someone's offering you a job for $6 an hour. We've got a minimum wage, so that's the bottom level, if you like, for the amount that you're going to receive. What jobs are there that Kiwis won't do? Kiwis who are out of work should have to take a job, any job, to get themselves back on that ladder. Now, it might not be the $100,000 salary that they want or have been used to in the past, but hang on a minute, you've got an obligation to work as well as receive. And so I think that we really do have to change the incentives in the system.
Okay, we'll take another break and we'll come back. I can see you've got something you want to say.
Yes.
We'll come back and chat some more in a couple of moments.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our discussion on welfare in the run-up to this year's election. Our guests are former ACT MP Dr Muriel Newman and Auckland City Missioner Diane Robertson. Diane, I could tell you were itching to get in just before the...
I think if it was so simple as incentives, then the whole problem would go away very quickly. And it's just that it isn't. And I don't think people, Muriel was talking about people, you know, almost choose this lifestyle of being on benefits. I actually don't believe that either. I think it's Mr Clayton's choice. It's very much like we see with homeless people, is all of their choices have been taken away from them, because if you start at the beginning with their stories, they say things like, by the time I was 7 I'd been in 29 foster homes. Well, yeah, just wipe that one, you know. Children who don't go to school, children who are sick all the time, children who are excluded because of poverty, all of those issues, they do not make a proactive choice about being on a benefit. That's the only choice. And we've got intergenerational of this at the moment. So suddenly walking in with a stick or an incentive and saying you must take a job is not going to change the way people view the world. And I think we've got to actually go right back to a whole culture change, which is a different thing. And that actually there is a danger of trying the incentive type system that will just actually cause a huge backlash and make it fail.
So what could we do? If we're not incentivising it, then what can we do?
I think part of the issue is, and Muriel's right, it's about if you are going to ask people to work, then you've got to look at all these other issues that go around it. Personally, I think that we do a lot about talking about how people should change people on benefits. I think we should also be starting to look about how governments and agencies should change. How do we treat the people who are on benefits with a lot less than respect than they should be? How do we engage them? How do we get them to engage back into community? Because with the lack of respect we give people who live on a benefit or who are homeless, and we continuously isolate them and push them away and then demand that they actually leap in and participate. And I think until agencies start actually engaging them in a better way, there's going to be no change.
I saw an interesting statistic a couple of years ago. Caritas, the Catholic charity, did a survey, and it revealed that most of the people on the DPB were actually only on it for a finite amount of time, and it was less than a year, which is interesting because the media image of someone on the DPB is they go on when they leave school, and they only come off when they get an old age pension when they're 65. But it would seem that isn't the case. So how much of our image of people who are on benefits is actually a wrong image that's given to us by the media?
I think with the DPB, it is interesting looking at the statistics, because the girls who go on as teenagers, and from memory there's a few thousand every year, they're the ones who tend to stay on in the very long term. But of course there's a lot of people whose relationships are breaking down, who need that helping hand, and then they move off. But if you look at the more worrying figures, which is the intergenerational problem, just as an example, when I was a Member of Parliament, I had a girl who came to work for me as work experience, and she was from the teenage school for young mums and pregnant girls. And her mother had been on the DPB. She was on the DPB, her mum had been on the DPB, and her grandmother, all her aunties, all her sisters, almost everybody in that whole family line had been on the DPB since it was first, brought in. And they get trapped in this system and this cycle. And I really do think that we have to do something serious about that, because obviously out of those families, you've got more bad things happening to the kids because it's one person trying to raise children when actually you probably need about 10, to be honest, not just 2. You need, wider loving family and all that, and you allow the system pays young girls without skills who've got no hope for the future. It gives them an option, and many of them take it. And, while we've got a system that encourages it, we've got problems as a society. So I really do think we need to look very carefully about the domestic purposes benefit as a priority.
Okay, $64 million question. When the politicians rock up to your front door, what will be the key question on welfare that you'll be asking and that you would suggest people watching might want to ask them?
Mine would be what programs are going to be put in place to assist families who are living in poverty and to help them to move out of poverty.
So you're talking about not providing benefit, you're talking about something that's longer term.
No, it's more about what is actually going to help families moving out of poverty, and that may be economic policy. It could be welfare policy. I think we focus on welfare, we focus on one sort of benefit thing, but actually you need to look at this in the context of the whole economic policy. So for me it would be what would be happening to move families out of poverty in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I'd like to see politicians make a commitment to tackling welfare reform. I mean, there are so many negative things happening now with the system as it stands. Again, it was put in with the best of intentions, but it's now changed substantially. But tackling welfare reform is tough. There's a lot of opposition, and you've got to be very courageous. And that's why we haven't seen politicians doing it. In the past, a lot of them will talk about it, and when they do start to do anything, they just tinker around the edges. So I would like to see a really strong commitment to making some good, sensible changes to the system that will stand this country and those families in good stead in the future.
Brave and bold decisions. Do you see those?
That's what I would like to see, yes.
That's a tough ask for politicians, though, isn't it? I mean, it's true. Yeah, because in some ways, it's the way the system is at the moment. You know, to start taking it apart and starting from scratch, that's a big ask.
But you mentioned David Cameron before. Now, it seems to me that they did a lot of work when they were in opposition on what changes should happen to welfare. Now, I'm not 100% sure how far he's going to go, but he's certainly come into the job saying that some things have to change. And I admire that, and I just hope that he actually has the courage of his convictions.
Do you think our politicians have that courage?
I actually think it's easy to sort of say that you're going to change a particular policy. Once again, I think it goes back to that's very much a beneficiary bashing type of thing. And I think we need to look at what will move families out of poverty. And that's a completely different way of looking at the issue rather than being punitive about a group of people.
But I don't agree with that. Yes. I don't agree. And this is why politicians don't reform welfare, because of exactly that sort of label gets put on them. You're just bashing beneficiaries. It's not that at all. If you look at the plight of many people in the benefit system, they live horrible lives. It's not a positive thing. It's an awful life to bring up a child in. And what we need to do is to create a system that looks after those who really need help, but it actually helps those who can do it themselves to get on their feet and go out there and make a better life for themselves and those children. So I see a real need for change.
Ladies, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. It's been very good. That's all we've time for this week. Our thanks to Dr. Muriel Newman and to Diane Robertson. We hope you've given you some food for thought and some effective tools for your meeting with campaigning politicians. Until next time, from all of us here on the End Zone team, bye for now.